Okay, we're back. And yesterday we did a recap show with our good friend Milo. Kind of a quick reaction to the Sonny Edwards fight, kind of given the jarring nature of the way it happened. Dakota, we're probably not going to dwell on this fight or card that much because we did a whole episode yesterday. And to be quite frankly, it wasn't really an outstanding card, in my opinion. What was your takeaways from this main event?
Man, my takeaways were just, everything that you needed to know about that fight. You saw in that moment where I don't know who his coach is, but he's asking him, do you have the legs to get up and move? And he said, do you want me to be totally honest? I really don't want to be here. And I think that's the whole story of the fight. There's really nothing else. The story, at least it's the story of the fight as far as Edwards goes, because, if that's the mentality, you're never going to get the maximum out of your abilities. For Yafai, I think that offensive intensity and pressure and relentlessness that he has is going to be difficult to beat, regardless of whether or not he's hittable. He's kind of a unit for that weight. When you watch how much more physical he can be, he's a problem. He's still hittable, but I think it's going to be difficult for a lot of guys to keep Yafai off of them. And the punch variety is great. It's just tough to gauge, based on a former world champion who, even though, he's in his late 20s, he looked kind of older and disengaged from the fight.
Okay, a couple of thoughts. First off, the win makes Yafai the mandatory for Ken Shiro. And is there no more fun fight in the lower weights than those two fighting?
That's got real chances to be kind of an all-timer in terms of action fights. I have to be honest, in light of this performance, I would lean towards Yafai, but that's a great matchup, and it's a great matchup for boxing too.
And I mean, I don't really see a reason why that fight shouldn't be made. That's a big money fight in Japan. It's a star versus a star type fight.
It's a
I think
no-brainer.
it's a no-brainer, right? So that fight has to happen. Secondly, I said this to Milo yesterday, and also thanks to Martin Mulligan in the chat. Big up to Luke. You've been enjoying the chat with Sean BTR, history-based stuff, his class. There were levels of Oliver McCall in this fight to me with Sonny Edwards, where it just felt like there was something mentally off with him from the beginning.
Absolutely.
It seemed like he was wanting the fight to be over in the second round. Like he mentally wasn't able to do it. And I had never seen him look this flat, uninterested, like you said, but his legs the legs were the Sonny Edwards elite component. And when he's willingly walking himself and putting himself on the ropes, there's no path to victory for him. So I found it kind of strange that the fight went on so long because he was kind of showing he just couldn't win the fight.
Yeah, I think what they were hoping was that at some point the championship medal was going to kick in and he was going to go, nah, fuck this. I'm not going out like this. But it just didn't look like he had the juice. I think a lot of that is mental, but some of it's got to be physical. I mean, Bam really hit him with a lot of shit. And, he's talking about not having the fight in him, not having the passion in him. And you do have to wonder how much of that is the Bam performance, which was a performance where if he showed he had anything, it showed he had the championship medal. You know what I mean? That he showed he had that character.
Well, and I think also hindsight being the best judge, his fight against Curiel was not an outstanding performance. Curiel's a smaller guy who he beat him, but he was having difficulty with the physicality of Curiel, who was smaller than him, but he was able to win because I think he was the naturally bigger guy.
Yeah, I think that ultimately a fight like the Bam fight where he made the choice to or maybe not the choice, he made the tactical adjustment of, if I stay on the move, Bam's going to get going downhill, it's going to snowball, it's going to give him momentum, so I have to stand my ground and deter him from coming in. He didn't have the firepower to do that, and it wound up being a tough physical fight. It almost looked like he wanted to do that again and get Yafai's respect, but there was a level of intensity that Galal, started the fight from jump with, that Sonny was just not able to match at all.
And I would also like to say that Yafai probably had the best first round I've seen in some time, where if Edwards wanted to win this fight, it was pretty clear the fight was taken out of him in the first round.
Yeah, like this is the tempo. This is the bar I'm setting, and if you can't match it, you're not going to hang, and that's what happened.
Kind of like the keys to victory we talked about. He weaponized pace, and he made the fight a physical fight, and he didn't let Sonny get into a groove or a rhythm or comfort.
Yeah, and he was still hittable, and Sonny still landed some big shots, and maybe if he was a bigger puncher, that would have deterred Yafai, but it didn't.
Sunday morning quarterback. Who gets more credit? What is the more accurate truth? Sonny Edwards was close to retirement, and that's why he looked this way. Or Galal Yafai is one of the best flyweights, and he kind of closed the door on Sonny Edwards and told him that he needed to retire.
I'm gonna go half and half, and I hate to be a fence sitter like that, but I do think it's both. I think that Galal Yafai fought probably the best fight of his career and looked really durable and set a pace that is going to be difficult for anyone to handle. I think the flip side of that is it when you have a former world champion in the corner saying, I really don't want to be here, there's no way you can't factor that in.
Next topic. Jaron Boots Ennis and Vergil Ortiz were talked about fighting. The fight is no longer going to happen. Have you kept up with this?
No, update me, bro.
Had to put the timestamp down so people listening on demand could get it. So the sequence of events, it begins with Jaron Boots Ennis's post-fight interview against Karen. I can't pronounce his last name.
Where he says, I need to move up.
And then there were statements that fight week to Boxing News that Bozy Ennis, not Bozy Edwards. Bozy Edwards is another person from boxing history. Bozy Ennis said that Vergil Ortiz team had turned down the fight, and I believe Eddie Hearn had even said we'll fight Vergil at 154, right? And various, I haven't gone through the whole, but that's what the Ortiz team. So Rick Morigian, the manager of Ortiz, has been very public in saying that at the last minute, it seems as though the Ennis team wanted Vergil to make 47 because Ennis wants to defend his belt. And I think anyone with any sense knows that that's not humanly possible. Vergil's been hospitalized.
This is where I get frustrated with Boots, man. And like when you do shit like that, it really does look like you're not serious about making meaningful matchups.
Well, and I think that for me, the frustrating thing is I've been a Boots defender, but I did an exclusive with Morigian, and it's going to come out at some point on Boxing Scene. And they're very sincere in telling you, like, look, this is a 50-50 fight. It's a big money fight. Vergil said yes, but this is a real deal hard fight. This is not a gimme fight. This is not an easy fight. There's a level of sincerity in their statements that you know it's true to them because they weren't like, oh, yeah, we beat them. Like it. They were treating this as like this was going to be one of those milestone boxing events that birthed a superstar.
Right. And also, if you're Boots and you're saying, nah, I need Vergil to make 147, don't you remember the last time they tried to do that multiple times and it didn't work? Like, it seems like he's either not paying attention to the landscape of the division or he's not serious about making meaningful matchups. And at a certain point, you'd have to, this is coming from a fan, but you do have to blame the fighter and the team for the inactivity, for the lack of meaningful matchups that he's taking part in where, he's rematching guys for fights that he won 12 zip.
And I think the other thing to bring up here is Ennis has only made one public statement. And I think that that's a big thing is there could be more to this story, but when you don't make a public statement, that really hurts, right? That hurts in the eye of the public because you don't know necessarily. So let me read to you in the sanctity of fairdom.
The sanctity of fairdom. I like that.
I know that was such a great. I seen the rumors on social media just like y'all did as far as the fight with me and Vergil. I was unaware that alleged negotiations were being made on my end from here on out. If it didn't come from me and me only, don't believe it. I will address if I'm staying at 47 or moving up to 54 at a later date and time. That's his only statement I have found so far on the internet, and that's on X.
I mean, it's that just from you saying that in public, bro, it just sounds to me like you're not driving the car at all. You're a passenger.
It's a strange story, right? Because it's like with Riyadh season, there's issues, right? We can talk about, but there's a lot of money. And for a lot of these star boxers, you can get paid kind of equitable wages or above market value for your fights. And this is a mega fight, you know? And it just, I guess my question is, if this fight's off the table, now there's talks on the internet that maybe Xander Zayas is going to step in and fight Vergil Ortiz, because on the internet, he posted a tweet that somewhat seemed to insinuate that he was taking that fight. And people are running with it, etc., because that's the internet. A fighter says something, run with it. But I guess my question is, if Boots isn't taking this fight, what fight does he take that's as impactful?
Well, and do I care? That's the other question, is do I care anymore? I mean, I have to feel like the fighter cares about making interesting fights for me to care. And so when you start doing this, it's like after enough times, I lose interest. As much as I like Boots, as much as I think he's a real talent, you lose me. At a certain point, you lose me. You can't be inactive for 3 years, essentially, and keep the public's interest if you can't keep my fucking interest.
And I guess one piece from their side that I've heard from Hearn is they want to keep the IBF title. But I mean, I don't know. It just seems weird, because it's like, what's the unification bout that keeps you there? Stanionis?
I like that fight. If they want to make that fight, by all means. But the first thing out of his mouth at the end of his last fight was, might be time to move up. So that's one where you kind of have to listen to the fighter and trust the fighter that, you know, he knows his own body.
I think one big thing that I'm looking at with Boots is confusion. And there's no clear direction from a fan or even from his career perspective or a historian. You can't get a sense of where his career is going at all. There's no...
Well, and now the performances are starting to suffer too. I mean, this last fight to me was really like, okay, where are we going with this? Because he's not getting a second chance at this guy and blowing him out the water. He's getting a second chance in this guy and looking worse, and the other guy looks better. So I don't really know what they're doing, man.
Okay, another rumor. It appears Kid Austin, Floyd Schofield, based on Twitter rumblings, could be filling in and fighting Shakur Stevenson on the February 2022 card. What are you thinking if that fight happens?
That's one that I'll believe when I see it, kind of deal. I think, like, I got to see it on a poster. I got to see it on BoxRec. In my mind, I do kind of feel like Shakur dominates that fight. I think that I got to give a ton of credit to Austin for taking that fight. And I think he's a really talented kid, but I think that that's going to be a Floyd Canelo kind of situation. It's just going to be a massive experience differential, but I love the matchup. I think it's probably will be one of, if not the most meaningful matchup Shakur's taken outside of the Valdez fight. Why not make that fight?
Yeah, I mean, I'm torn on it, because I think, like, it's hard to put any fighter in at 22 years old in that type of fight against, like, arguably the best guy. And I guess what their team is saying is, like, they brought up Ali was 22 when he fought in a big fight, etc. So I guess what they're saying is they see themselves as superstar fighters in the same vein as a Canelo or an Ali or those. And I guess the disconnect is, for me, I see him as a very talented fighter, a world title type fighter, but I'm not sure he's the guy that dominates the division for like a decade, like a Terrence Crawford. And it's pretty clear they see him as that, and they see this as their pathway to that. And he's kind of coming off, it's kind of like, we'll get into this later with Paro and Hitchinson. He's coming off a performance where he got sat on his wallet for being too aggressive. And we both were like, okay, he showed a lot of good things there, but he still needs to listen to his corner. Corner gets emotional.
There's things that need to be worked on. I got to be honest, man. Pops is yelling too much for a Shakur Stevenson fight. If they want to fight Shakur and they got to solve puzzles and adjust and solve problems, I don't want that guy in the corner, to be honest with you, man.
Yeah, I just think it's hard to be a trainer and a father. And I think it's hard to be the lead voice because you're balancing so many roles and you can't be one role, right? Because you have to balance how much you care about your son and a tactical game plan, and it's hard to not combine the emotion. We got number one boxing fan ducking Vergil, duck Vergil, my fighter, tell your fighter to fight my fighter. We send the contract, like you guys like to say. So sign it. You're doing everything but fight all the facts. Okay. Kid Austin versus Shakur is a fine fight.
I agree. I like the fight. I think we could all agree to some extent that if you wanted to prepare Floyd for that fight better, you could. But I can't get mad or speak badly on a young man that wants to challenge himself.
And there's another point. He's the number 2 by the WBA. So the WBA has rated him as the number 2 guy in the division. They could also, if the fight doesn't happen, do what everybody else is doing, bring in Tevin Farmer to see how Floyd Schofield does against Tevin Farmer.
It's also, that's not even a good comparison anymore because Tevin's such an in-the-pocket fighter these days that I don't think one doesn't have anything to do with the other.
Well, I think also Tevin knows that promoters are looking at him like that. And I think he's such a capable and diverse fighter. He's totally doing things that people didn't think he could do. And now I think promoters are like, oh, wait, this guy can punch with you. like I think that the Zepeda fight, they assumed he was going to be moving backwards the whole fight.
Yeah.
And he just came in with a brilliant game plan and arguably beat Zepeda and definitely took the luster off the fighter for sure.
Yeah. And I think, again, I think the issue with the fight is not the matchup for me. It's just like, until I see it, it's tough for me to believe that Shakur Stevenson's in a meaningful, like a big fight. So I got to see it.
Our next one, Cameron Vuong. Did you see this fight? It was pretty bad.
I mean, it was a fun fight. It was a fun watch.
Yeah, but what did you see from it?
I saw the first half. I saw the things about him that I like, that I've gotten excited about. I thought he won at least 3 or 4 of the first 5 rounds of the fight. He was moving well. The hand speed was there. He's hitting Gwynne really clean. And then down the stretch, Gwynne's not throwing anything hard, but he's just staying real busy. And it looked like Vuong started getting complacent, just standing there taking it, not realizing that, okay, it's not hurting you, but it's affecting the score. And this is a close fight. I felt like the scores were fair. It was an extremely close fight, but listen, I think that Cameron is another guy. He's a work in progress. There's things to like. There's things that are a little bit worrying, but he is also, in a sense, responding in moments against a guy with way more experience, both in the ring and out of the ring, just an older, more experienced man. And I thought that Gwynne was extremely game. The engine on that guy is crazy. And I thought it was really smart how, he really didn't try to put too much on any one individual shot. He just tried to out-volume him and put him in place with combinations, and then he would sit down a little more, but he wasn't really committing to any one shot.
So to me, the big thing I see is Vuong doesn't have a lot of fundamentals at times. He keeps his hands low. His feet are kind of messed up, so he can only throw 1 or 2 punches at a time, relies on athleticism. And when that pace is put on him, his style can't go a long duration at a hard, fast pace. And my fear is he's in a 10-round fight with a veteran, which means he's in that step your game up part of his career. Even though he's 22, even though he's got 7 fights, he's being treated like a top-tier blue-chip prospect that's going to have big fights in his 10th fight. I didn't see a guy that resembled what his pedigree is. I saw him as a work in progress, a good fighter that needs 3 years. And I think he's being billed as this could be a generational talent, superstar fighter. I still think there's a level of like arrogance to him that gets him in trouble in fights. Like I
And
think
if Gwynne had more power, bro, he would have gotten Vuong out of there. I mean, I started to see a level of, visual discomfort on Vuong that you don't want to see in a fighter, particularly when they've won 4 out of the first 5 rounds. You don't want to see that expression on their face. You want to see them close strong, whereas it was ultimately the experience and the engine of Gwynne that finished the fight.
Yeah, I mean it was very much a fight I felt that was supposed to catapult him to the next level. And instead it kind of like helped Gavin Gwynne probably get more fights like this.
Sure.
And
Now
Cameron
I
Vuong,
want to see it.
yeah, and to me, what it does to Cameron Vuong is it makes people wonder how good he is, how he does. Where I think this was supposed to be a fight where he catapulted into the mix, and
This just it sounds like it's all multiple instances of kind of jumping the gun. But I think to say that there's nothing there, there's no talent, I don't agree with that either. There's clearly something there if he could go 10 rounds with a guy of this
no,
caliber.
I agree with that. There's something there. I just think he really needs refinement. He
Big
has a
time.
lot of coordination. He has a lot of athleticism. He has a lot of God-gifted abilities, and he seems like a guy that probably gets away with stuff in the gym. He's able to beat up sparring partners based off of his athleticism and stuff, but he just needs experience. And I guess that in this generation, I hate saying this to sound like an old guy, but in this Instagram generation, people want things so immediate. They want money immediate. They want gratification and likes immediate. And like this could be a very good fighter in 3 years. Is he gonna get 3 years to develop? I don't think so. I think he wants to be in interesting fights that people know about, know the name of the other fighter ASAP, and I'm not sure he's ready for that.
I don't know if he is either, but isn't that refreshing in light of what we're hearing about a Boots and Vergil fight? That a lot of these guys get up to a certain level and getting them in the ring is like such a fucking project.
It is. Like, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because I'm tearing down one guy for one thing, and then I'm tearing down another guy for another thing, like, wanting it. It's like, can't we just get the guy that meets in the middle? The guy that gets the refinement, and when he's refined, he just takes good fights.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But listen, I think Vuong is trying to do kind of what Yafai is doing, and he may have some bumps along the road when you take that path.
I actually think that's a great comparison. He's taking and Jahai also is kind of similar to Vuong, right? They're both awkward, and at times they have fundamental lapses, but they get away with it because they're just that guy that's athletic and coordinated and able to do things other guys can't do.
Yeah, and I think Jahai is maybe even a little bit ahead of Vuong in terms of starting to really refine his style, but I think they're similar in terms of, they're taking risky fights that if you're in there, if you're a fan, you're going, are we really doing that this early? And Cameron Vuong might take a loss or two before it's all said and done, but it looks like he's really, committed to that.
Okay, fight preview. This week we got Emanuel Navarrete rematching Oscar Valdez. What are your thoughts on this?
I like the fight. I know that Navarrete's last couple of performances are not great, but there's still always the context of Navarrete won the first fight. And I think that's entirely possible that was his last sort of vintage Navarrete performance. And I don't know if he's got any of those left in him at this point. Moving up to lightweight, now coming back down to 130. I don't know what that's going to take out of him. It does kind of feel like everything is leaning in Oscar's direction, other than the fact that Navarrete already has the mental edge of having beaten Valdez.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, to me, I guess it's just a weird fight in the sense that it seems like it's made because it's the biggest commercial viable fight to make. It's of the champions and of the contenders. I know that there was I believe Valdez won the interim title when he beat Liam Wilson. He's been out for a long period of time now. That being said, Navarrete looked terrible against Denys Berinchyk. Berinchyk did not look outstanding winning that title either. It was a very lackluster and unurgent fight. And Valdez has really been out of sight, out of mind since fighting Navarrete. He's fought, I believe, one time off the top of my head, but we haven't seen much
against Liam Wilson.
Against Liam Wilson. But I mean,
and
he's
very dominant.
It was a good performance, but what I'm saying is, like, it doesn't feel like either guy is riding into momentum into this rematch, which is a weird thing because the first fight was billed as this is going to be like a Mexican trilogy. And for all we know, it could be a trilogy, but it's going to be like a weird trilogy because if Valdez wins this fight, I'm sure they're going to do a third fight because then it would become a trilogy. But the first fight, Navarrete was able to take over that second half of the fight. And I don't know. It's weird because I feel like that first fight, we kind of figured out how the styles play out. And now going into this fight, does Navarrete still have that second gear to be awkward and to change things up and to hit hard enough and make the weight? Because he moved up. That's another thing people haven't talked about, although people haven't talked about this fight. Navarrete went to lightweight and now is going back to 130. And he already was a guy that struggled with weight and had issues. And this is not like Mr. Gym guy. This is not like, I mean, I think he trains hard, but this is not a guy that really, I think, follows a strict diet and stuff.
Yeah, and again, we talk about these things relative to other world-class elite level fighters. Of course, the guy's in the gym, right? But there's a level that you go to in the top 10 of a weight class that clearly, I think it's pretty obvious that he doesn't have that type of work ethic. Similarly to Zordo, where there was just always that talent component, that engine component, where he's just got it maybe like a little more naturally than these other guys. But it looks like, the timetable on his body being able to deliver under those circumstances, that's winding down. So now he's in a position of, do I have a second chapter?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the more I think about it, it's an interesting fight. I'll be interested when they get in the ring, but it's not a scintillating matchup to me, if I'm being honest.
I'm kind of into it, actually. I'm gonna just be mildly optimistic. I'm kind of into it. The first one was a great fight. It wasn't a Barrera Morales, but it was a great fight. It's two guys who are maybe lacking a little direction in their career and need something good to happen to kind of make them viable against Shock and some of the other top guys at 130. If Oscar Valdez gets an explosive knockout over a guy that beat him, that gets the job done. And if Navarrete is able to beat a guy who's pretty consistently just been one of the best guys at his weight, I think it shows that he is, he's also back. So I'm kind of into it, bro. I'm not going to lie.
I guess that's the weird thing is it's a world title fight that's essentially who's back. And that's a weird predicament, right?
Yeah, I got to be honest. I thought Oscar looked really great against Liam Wilson in his last fight. I thought he looked great.
It's hard for me to not think Valdez is going to win one of these fights because I just feel like Oscar trains his butt off and he works so hard. And maybe I'm a broken record, but I just feel like Navarrete, that the lifestyle component, we don't see him around like big, quote unquote, big name fighters. Like, I got photos. I didn't recognize who he's sparring. Feels like eventually that catches up to you unless you're the one person that can get away with it. But it's hard for me to not believe that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, co-feature. This is the one everyone wanted us to talk about. Robeisy Ramirez against Rafael Espinoza. What are your thoughts, Dakota?
So we did kind of a mini breakdown on this one already. But man, this is such a 50-50 to me because I felt like clearly Espinoza won the first fight. But there was real moments in that fight too where Robeisy had Espinoza really close to getting stopped and had him buzzed and hurt and backing up. This is a tough one to call, bro. I mean, I think that Espinoza, with the height and the length and the punching power and his ability to use those things, he's just such a handful at this weight class. But I also think there are elements of Robeisy's style that bother Espinoza. And so I'm sort of leaning towards Robeisy because I see so much upside in him, but this could be, Junior Jones and Barrera. It could just be an instance where a guy's got your number. I'm not sure.
See, for me, I think the more I think about it, the more I favor Espinoza. Because, I mean, Robeisy, to me, super talented, but I think what we started to fall in love with, that offensive mindset, weaponizing his talent, he has to go back to being a different guy. And I'm not sure you can become that different guy in 2 fights. Because I think he's going to have to mix it up. He's obviously going to have to bang with him because what's hard about Espinoza is he's a pressure fighter who's 6'1". Like if you looked at his frame, you'd think he was Ray Vargas. Ray Vargas, big, tall, featherweight, and he stays on the outside and he kind of looks like Ichabod Crane. He's always moving away from you, poking you. Espinoza fights like Nick Ball. But he's 6'1".
But to be honest, against Robeisy, there was a lot of stretches where what was impressive to me was how he was able to keep the fight long. He was able to punch in combination at times where Robeisy couldn't answer, and to me, that was the key. If he gives that distance up, I think he will get knocked out.
So to me, I'm a big Robeisy guy. I think the volume of Espinoza is going to be an issue for Robeisy. He's never been a big punch count guy.
Yeah.
He's been a guy that waits. I think the punch volume was a thing that caught up to him in that first fight. And I think Espinoza, right now, devil's advocate, you could say he's basically announcing he's going to move up after this fight, which we all know that's never a good thing. He's training next to Serhii Boachuk in Mexico at altitude with Manny Robles. I think that he's going to look better. And I think this might be one of those Emanuel Navarrete type guys who just emerge out of nowhere. And I think this might be his moment. And I think there could be a world where Robeisy turns into kind of the what if Cuban Olympian. But I think the other thing about Robeisy is he took a lot of real fights,
He's taking a lot of real fights. If he loses another close decision to this guy, I don't think that's the end of his career. But it does sort of change his trajectory. The other thing I would love to see Robeisy do is just make his feet more of a factor in this fight. I think he's the guy with the better footwork. And I think that if he can make, angles and take some more of that initiative in terms of the footwork and maybe some more educated pressure, to me, it's very much a 50-50.
I think it's going to come down to little things, right? Like Ismael Salas, I think, is an amazing technical coach in the gym. I'm not sure how he's doing in the corner these days. We've had mixed results.
Yeah, we've talked about that. Yeah.
Manny Robles, solid coach. He did good with Serhii Boachuk. I think it could be as simple as like, how do both world-class coaches maximize their fighter, right?
Mm-hmm.
We no longer get to say, oh, they're a good coach ambiguously.
Right. We know you're a good coach.
We know they're a good coach, right? We know that. We know they both have strengths. And obviously, if you have strengths, you have weaknesses. Who can maximize the talent of their fighter over this coming week? Because they both have flaws. They both honestly do. So I think it's going to come down to things like the team, the preparation, the focus, the will, corny tropes, I think are going to be the things that determine this fight as much as skill.
Yeah, and I somewhat look at it similarly to like a rematch between Bivol and Canelo, where I think Robeisy was hitting Espinoza with shit that other guys don't take. They go down, and it wasn't affecting Espinoza consistently in the same way, other than I think it was the 6 or 7 round where he almost knocks him out. That was the power affecting him. But he's going to have to find a different way than kind of just throwing individual hard shots and hoping that they affect Espinoza.
Boxing Learner in the chat, Espinoza and Ramirez is what I'm looking forward to.
Me too.
Barack Moody, I believe Robeisy will do better this time because he is a better boxer and Espinoza will struggle to make weight. I mean, I think
a fight too, and I'll let you finish, Luki, but I think this is a fight too where the other one was really rough. Did either of them leave anything in there that night?
Yeah, and I just, for me, the closer this gets, and this is gonna be the ultimate press conference thing because Espinoza and Navarrete are gonna be guys you're gonna be waiting on Friday if you're like me to see if anyone has a scale issue, because it would not shock you because these are big guys, and you want to see how they look. But I think that's a great point, Dakota, is we haven't really seen either guy in with a top tier, top 10 opponent since this fight.
Yep.
Who do you lean towards?
I'm like 55-45 Robeisy. It's not going to shock me if Espinoza wins. I just think about that middle part of the fight where he almost knocks him out. And I think about if he changes up his approach, he can land that shot again. But ultimately, it's going to come down to, does he change his approach? Or is he set in what he is?
Yeah, and I think that like the one thing that scares me is like the big shot Shaws and some of these guys we've seen that have great skills, and their adjustment is take more shots at times. And that's been a trend I've seen. Even with Sonny Edwards, it's like his default when he didn't want to be there was like, let me sit on the ropes and take shots, which is strange.
Josh Kelly,
right? We've seen that. And that's what I can't shake out of my mind, is that's been a trend I've kind of noticed this year, is some fighters' adjustment is, let me go in there and land something big. And it's like the adjustment that maybe you and me, unemotional, right? We're not the fighter. We're not the one that did it. But that's an adjustment I've seen a bit as of late now in the boxing game.
And I think it's misguided. It's misguided in the sense that the wins are ultimately what keep you rolling, even if it's, not exactly what the fans want to see. An entertaining loss sets you back more than a slow win in most cases.
Okay, so undercard, I think that the fans of this program should be well aware of this banger of a fight. I think it's a good fight. Lindolfo, Delgado, Jackson, Marinez, 10-round fight. What do you think of this fight, Dakota?
It's a good fight, man. I just feel like Lindolfo is the new Arnold Barbosa, where it feels like he's constantly one away from the big one. But this is probably the closest thing to the big one that he's had so far. Marinez, I haven't seen him in a couple of years, but I remember his fight with Rolly. He won that fight really clear, and they kind of ripped him off. He gets stopped by Comey after, then gets stopped by Frank Martin, but he's had some good wins since
Frank
then.
Martin win, though, if you remember, he was winning rounds against him. That was
a
late mercy stoppage.
Yep. And I've really liked Marinez's skills, when I've seen him.
Because to me, the other storyline is, I believe Marinez, when he fought Rolly, was training with Robert Garcia. Garcia trains Delgado. So there's like a little, does that favor one side or another? But to me, the big thing with Delgado that I think is hurting his career is punch output. He's a very technical and talented fighter. He hits hard. He has all the tools. I just think at that next level of boxing, you're going to get labeled, rightly or wrongly, a boring fighter if the punch output isn't high. And in a couple of his fights lately, the story of the fight has been, look at how many punches are thrown in the wrong way.
And also, I think Lindolfo has shown to be pretty hittable in his last couple fights in a way that his skill set would suggest he doesn't have to be.
So I guess throwing back to you, do you think his lack of punch volume stems from that he gets hit sometimes?
I just feel like, I think that at a certain point, guys like that are that talented, it just starts to get a little stale when you don't throw them a bone in terms of something to get excited about. And that's kind of more so what I feel like I've been watching with his last couple fights.
So Marinez is training, it looks like, with Salas. So he probably was in camp with Robeisy. So, I mean, real fight, it looks like. Or at least I don't know how true that is, but 3 weeks ago, it looks like he was at Salas's boxing gym. I'm watching the El Phoenix video that came out 2 days ago. He's on a Zoom call with people. I don't know. To me, this is like a sneaky, tough trajectory fight, because it's like Lindolfo really needs to get that level up win to get out of the Andreas Cortez, Andy Vences, Arnold Barbosa lane of every fight is the big fight. But this is a guy who realistically kind of can take advantage of some of the things that he doesn't do well.
Yeah, and I think, Marinez, if I remember his style correctly, he's a pretty outside fighter, so it's going to rely on Lindolfo doing a little more initiating than we've seen him do, at least recently.
And I think another story of the fight, cutting off the ring. How does Lindolfo cut off the ring? Because this is a guy, and also how much does Marinez have? Marinez could go in there, his legs aren't there, gets hit with a right hand, and we go, oh my God, this is incredible. Muted, bub.
Exactly. I think that, it is a good 50-50 fight. I'm not sure for Lindolfo, even if he dominates this fight, it still feels a little like a lateral move, no?
I mean, to me, it feels like they don't know what to do with him, to be honest with you. I mean, the Brian Flores fight, if we're being objective, that was a 50-50 fight. But it could have gone either way, right? So it feels like you have a junior welterweight that isn't the most exciting guy, and you don't know where to move him up in the division or who to have him fight, because not just is he not exciting, you don't really have a gauge on his skill set.
Yeah, he's one I feel like, though, you got to just throw in the deep end. He's in his early 30s. Like, you got to just toss him in. We look at a guy like Cameron Vuong. He's getting tossed in his 7th fight. I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to toss this guy in when I feel like he's just continually passed tests and checked boxes and not particularly rewarded for it.
Well, I think like a real fight that would be a good fight for me that it has a lot of unanswered questions. Albert Puello versus Lindolfo Delgado. Both guys, I don't really understand who they are per se. I think another real fight would be Sandor Martin, but I think Sandor Martin's going to fight Albert Puello, but potentially if he were to fight the winner of that, who would have a belt, we don't know what those fighters really look like, at least to me, and they'd have a belt. And I think that's what you got to do with guys who have an established record. Maybe roll the dice and see if they can get a title shot and just figure out where they fit in.
Or toss them in with, Jose Ramirez. That's a great fight, too.
Stablemate, though.
Yeah.
Together. Yep. So, I mean, I think a lot of the issue there, Lindolfo versus Teofimo Lopez, in my opinion. I mean, I like that fight, right? But Teofimo, I don't know if you heard, he's training with Eddie Reynoso now and Canelo. And I just feel like Teo is going to only want superstar type fights. That's a real fight, though. I like that fight.
Yeah, Teo don't have the superstar performances to back that up, though.
Inconsistent performances for sure. I think the thing that also hurts Lindolfo is junior welterweight has a logjam because a lot of the top names don't fight. And he's in that second tier of fighter that really needs an active champions fighting all the time.
They kind of do fight each other, though, bub. At this
weight,
I'm
saying Haney, Teofimo, Ryan, these big names. A lot of the champions are waiting on these big names to get life-changing paydays, and I feel like he's kind of stuck in this holding pattern because those big names aren't fighting that frequently.
Yeah.
Because I think Puello and Sandor Martin haven't fought because they're waiting on a date because of, another, and it kind of has like a trickle-down effect where guys like Lindolfo Delgado, the division just keeps every year. It's the same division, basically.
Yeah.
Some guys to notice on the undercard, your guy, Giovani Santillan, coming back, taking on Frederick Lawson. A guy I'm super high on. 2 guys I'm super high on. Albert Chop Gonzalez, Steven Navarro, they're on the undercard. Anybody that you see on the undercard that you like?
Man, I really like watching Steve Navarro. There's a lot to like there, man, between the angles, the combination punching, the creativity. That's one of my, at the moment at least, that's one of my favorite, under 5 fighters to watch.
Want to know the funnest thing about him is I've been covering him since his amateur career. So I've been watching the rise, and the first time I saw him, I said, this kid is really special. And I saw him as an amateur. And that's good. I'm telling you, though, watch Albert Chop Gonzalez. The story is there, the charisma is there, and I'm telling you, the talent is there. Every time I watch him fight, he looks like a special dude.
I feel like I've seen him. I just couldn't call out a fight. I just remember seeing Steve's last 2 fights, I think, and there's just occasionally you see a guy where you're like, this guy's doing something a little different,
Not to prematurely say it, you see the main event fighter in him. right?
Totally.
You see the main event fighter in him. And I'd say that I see the main event fighter in Albert Chop Chop Gonzalez too. To me, they scream guys that are going to be in the main and co-main pretty soon. I would put Art Barrera as a guy to watch. He's with Robert Garcia. He's a work in progress, in my opinion, but there's some things to like. He's not as far along to me as those guys, but he's in the welterweight division. Welterweight's about to get a little weaker. And Giovani, right, coming off of that Brian Norman loss, has taken on Frederick Lawson. Obviously, Frederick Lawson has had a really hard year, losing to Vergil Ortiz and Alexis Rocha, etc. Probably a bounce back win for him. But Giovani has a really good record, and we talk about it like.
And he's got a lot of big fucking question marks over his head, bub.
For sure. For sure, he's got a lot of question marks, but when he's got that established record now, and elephant in the room, I don't know who you're picking the week after this, but we got Alexis Rocha, Raul Curiel. If Raul Curiel beats Alexis Rocha, we might have an organic rematch between Giovani and Alexis Rocha, possibly.
I think you could do that rematch even if Rocha dominates the fight.
I think it's very curious when they're fighting a guy that Rocha just fought. I think that's a very curious thing.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you find that a little convenient?
I can't tell if it's convenient or if it's just that Frederick Lawson is the new like high level comeback fight guy.
And he's willing to take a fight. Like he's a guy that's like, okay, I'm always in the gym, because like, let's go deeper into this, right? Smarter show than most. Frederick Lawson's probably a guy that stays in the gym, doesn't miss weight, and isn't a problem during fight week. So promoters are like, oh, wait, we need a high level comeback guy. This guy doesn't miss weight. He's always in the gym.
We can rely on him.
Because I think that's what people go, oh, I don't like these matchups, but I think that goes into a lot of the takes with that stuff.
It's a great point. I mean, Curtis Harper got 15 chances fighting on TV and never had really even like a good round. And, it was curious.
I think that's a heavyweight necessity thing, though, with him, because I think there's only so many viable heavyweights. And I think heavyweight's one of those weird divisions where it's a money glamour division where some fighters can hold the division hostage because they know they serve a certain level in a development of a young fighter. And though you always kind of rail on him, he's a guy that's given a lot of good fighters tough nights. Like he's had a couple of really competitive. It might have been before your time, but
I agree with everything you're saying. I just don't think it applies to Curtis Harper.
He's had some nights where he gave guys trouble. It's just it was before the F.A. Ajagba fight,
right?
And that was pretty weird to say the least. And I think he just fits in with that. I don't know if Richard Torrez is fighting on this card. I don't know if Emiliano
says he is.
Says he is, but on BoxRec it doesn't.
Oh no, on BoxRec it does, Bob.
Oh, read to me the matchups.
It says Richard Torrez versus Isaac Munoz Gutierrez. What was the other one you were looking for?
We'll talk about Torrez because I think Torrez deserves a segment because the lazy narrative with Torrez is always like he's make up any weight, make up any height. 6'1", he's 6'1". Can he be a heavyweight? And then you look at his amateur pedigree and he was fighting 6'5" guys and won all except for Jolyoff. So I think he'll be all right to a certain extent. He's a guy to me that you should roll the dice with because there are flaws. He's going to get hit, but this is a good. Everything about Richard Torrez is, I think, everything you want in a boxer. He's not cringy. He's sincere. Great personality, great person. Give him a couple of really good tester fights because I think he's going to shine. And I think some of his developmental fights have made him an unlikable fighter when he's probably one of the most likable fighters in recent memory.
I think the issue at this point, beyond just not taking the best competition, I don't feel like the fights he's having are preparing him to be a modern heavyweight contender. This was the issue we had with Jared Anderson, where Jared's 6'3", 6'4", 230, and was, at least on his come up, consistently the bigger guy in the ring, and we're seeing that with Richard. And once you crack that top 10, the only guy he might be the same size as is Usyk. He's going to be considerably smaller than everyone else at the top of the division, and I just don't think they're preparing him for that adequately,
Well,
in my opinion.
Munoz, one loss fighter. His one loss is to Jermaine Franklin. I believe he's the
That was a
808
rough
assassin.
watch, though. That was a rough watch.
Do you remember that fight?
I do, because it was a rough watch.
So how do you think this fight goes? Do you think Torrez steamrolls him, or is this going to be a tough one?
I think that Richard can do whatever he wants. I think he can steamroll him. I think he can box. He's got great technical ability. He's got great feet. He showed that against Joey DeWaco. You know, I like to see Richard give the variety. But I at this point, I do want to start seeing him in with guys that at least look like, you know, who he's going to have to get in with when it gets to the top of the division.
I just want the truth. Had some good comments. Give me Espinoza versus Albert Bell, 2 Skeletors fighting. Love that comment.
Love that.
Vergil Ortiz, the same one that said we're going to meet all the way up there. How Boots a duck when Vergil wouldn't mention his name till a bad performance. And then Mexican boxing fan wants you to know Boots ducking Vergil again. So
yeah, I don't think anyone is saying anyone is, at least in my opinion, no one's ducking anybody. But what I'm seeing from Boots is a lack of commitment to making fights that are going to keep the fans engaged. So whether I think he's better or not, I'm just not seeing that, you know, commitment.
Yeah, and I think that the tough part is we see a Roy Jones Jr. type talent with Boots. And sadly, he's not taking some of those Roy Jones type fights.
I'm going to go on record and say saw, because I don't see it anymore, to be honest with you.
So you think it's the past?
I think it is the past to some extent. You know, he's going to have to move up and wait and find some new stuff, because I just see a level of hitability and vulnerability that you wouldn't see it with a prime Roy. And you really didn't see from Boots up until a couple fights ago, even against good contenders, you know, like Lipinets and some of these, you know, these tough guys that he beat on the way up. You know, I'm not seeing that right now. So there's nothing for me. The momentum on Boots is not good.
Couple more comments. Says picking for Vergil now. I wish Torrez and Jared Anderson could focus on Bridgerweight. They are small for skilled big men. Yeah, he trash, horrible defense. I mean, I don't think he's trash. I just think that
me neither.
He's obviously a top 3 guy in whatever division he goes to. I think that it's just when you're that talented and that interesting, there is a level of obligation to make interesting fights for the fans.
And if you're not going to, the performances have to be such wow factors. And there's nothing wow factor about that last fight for me.
What about Richard Torrez versus Zane Kaskubaski?
Didn't he have a fight with a Jogbo where he just kept hitting him in the nuts?
Yeah, he got DQ'd, and I feel like it's hard to put a prospect in with a guy that got DQ'd and kind of gave you an ugly TV fight.
Yeah, I'm not really into rewarding that. That's always kind of been my issue with Curtis Harper, is I just feel like he gets rewarded for being like a wild card. And I'm not sure that's helpful. I mean, it would be a good test in terms of like he's never fought at that level. So and Kasabutski, you know, would be a more modern size heavyweight. Actually, I'm doing a full 180 there. I think that is actually at least a step in the right
Camp
direction.
with Fury, I believe, too. So I mean, it's a realistic.
That's a step in the right direction.
It's a realistic one. The big, I guess we could call it the big fight of the weekend: Liam Paro, Richardson, Hitchinson. What's your thought? This is going to be one of the hardest fights to say Richardson Hitchins, because I feel like people are going to say Richard Hitchinson. They're going to say Richardson
all
Hitchinson.
The time, bro.
It's going to just be a atrocious name thing this week. What is your gut feeling on this fight?
My gut feeling on this is that Liam Paro, whether we want him to be or not, might be the best guy in the division, and he's going to beat more exciting, flashy guys like Hitchins, like Subriel Matias. You know, I think he's sort of a Jack Catterall type. It's just what he does is super effective. He's clearly able to stay disciplined for a full 12-round fight. Now, a couple of years ago, you know, seeing him live, I would have told you Richardson Hitchins was one of the most talented young fighters out there, and I still maintain that. But in light of the Lemos fight, I'm just not sure that in this particular matchup that the momentum is in his favor. We'll see, though. You know, Liam's not a real pressure guy, and clearly what gave Hitchins problems about Lemos was the fact that he was a relentless pressure fighter. So it may be a style that is actually, you know, better made for Richardson to shine, or at least get that air.
I slightly favor Hitchins because I saw Montana Love give Paro a lot of problems early in that fight. And Paro actually put mental pressure on Love and knocked him out. And I don't think Montana Love has fought since that fight. He might not fight again.
He has not.
He has not fought since that fight. And I mean, to me, I take Hitchins' word that he had a bad weight cut. So I take the word that the weight cut was bad. It seems as though he's doing different things this camp for a nutrition to cut the weight. Like he learned from that mistake. I always like it when a fighter actually addresses a problem and said, listen, this is what I did around that. And I think this is just a really good style matchup for him, where Paro's kind of, like you said, a jack of all trades. He's not the guys that are going to give Hitchins problems are going to be the guys that are going to go through hell and just walk you down, but they do it with a little bit of nuance, right? They're going to come, step, shift, and they're going to put a lot of pressure where he can't get that space and work. That being said, am I confident in this pick? Not really, because Paro is a guy kind of like Albert Puello in this division. I never really think about them, but he could be one of the best guys. Honestly, he holds a belt, so they both are one of the best guys, but I never hold them to that standard. But there's a world where
I feel like with Paro, you kind of have to give him that credit, you know, because he's beaten Subriel Matias, but we're talking about, you know, Devin Haney, who lives in a courtroom right now. Like he's still the top guy. You know, I'm looking at active fighters. If I'm looking at active, relevant guys, Liam Paro's top 3, man.
See, the thing is, when Hitchins looks good, he looks nearly unbeatable. And he's beaten very, very good fighters that I feel like were championship level fighters that he beat on the way up, like John Bauza. To me, John Bauza has a lot of the elements
that was the one I was there for, and that was kind of at least the performance for me. I was in before, but seeing that, you know, up close and in person, you know, I was very much sold on the kid.
And I think also, like, with him fighting more frequently, he's getting stoppages. You know, I think part of the thing with him was he was fighting, and he's a guy that, I wouldn't say he's a big puncher, but he's accumulation accurate puncher. So that he's a guy that the longer the fight goes, and if he's doing what he does, he can stop guys based on accumulation and accuracy. Paro, I don't know how to read, right? Because there were points where it felt like Matisse was gonna swing the fight and he battled back. So that speaks to him. But should I be worried that Matisse battled back and he didn't dominate the fight? With Love, he started really slow, but then he finished the fight emphatically. It's just a strange overall tenor, right?
He's a get the job done guy. That's the thing. He's a get the job done guy. So it's not always going to look perfect, but he's going to figure it out. Now, he may not figure it out against Hitchins, but I think that's kind of his X factor, is he's a figure it out guy.
Paro has power in both hands, but if Hitchins can manage the distance well, he has the skills to outpoint Paro. Outside of Matisse, Hitchins has a better resume.
I think that's probably true, but debatable. I mean, you know, Matisse
they're both entering the good fight. I think.
By the way, Yomar Alamo was a really nice win too for Paro.
Well, and if you watch the pre-fight show, Hitchins kind of gets on him because he beat Almo and Paro got dropped by him, and he brings up the fact that he didn't feel power in that fight. Also in the chat, look out for Tamba Merlin. He's fighting at cruiserweight prospect, fighting in the UAE out of Ghana. He's fighting December 28th, and Paro going to have to pressure him.
We'll keep an eye for him.
So any other thoughts on this fight? I feel like this is, to me, is the biggest wild card, the fight I want to see.
That's the kind of fight I like, baby.
But it's a weird one because it's a more fighter-centric one, so there's not storylines to talk about per se.
I think that I just want the truth makes a great point. The thing is, Paro's not great at one thing, but he has the ability to adapt. That's the thing I'm talking about with that he just gets the job done thing. And that's a dangerous guy to deal with. Whereas with Hitchins, he might be the most naturally gifted guy in the division, but then we see a guy like Lemos really make him uncomfortable for a full 12. So, but that's part of what makes this a fun matchup. These are the kinds of fights we like. You know what I mean? This is the shit that I geek out for.
Yeah. Henry LeBron versus Pitufo Diaz. It's been rumored a few times. I believe it's the co-feature of this card. What do you think of that fight?
That's a hell of a fight, bro. That's a hell of a fight. I love me some Henry LeBron. I think that Chris Diaz has just been like a fighter's fighter for years now. Lost some really close decisions in his day. This is a great matchup, bro.
And he's not washed up. I was looking at his resume. It's like he had
what about him is washed up? Yeah, what about him is washed up?
Well, no, like normally when you see this matchup, you're like, okay, passing the torch. But it's like he lost to Isaac Dogbo in the last TV fight that I remember. And I remember that being a very close fight that I thought Pitufo won.
I thought he won that fight. And, you know, the fight with Navarrete was probably one of the reasons Navarrete slowed down as quickly as he did. I mean, that was a really physical. He hit Navarrete with a lot in that fight.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good fight. And then Henry LeBron kind of in the Liam Paro style of, I know he's good, but I can't break down what he's super good at. Coming off a fight that I felt like was a coin flip on who won with William Foster III. I remember we kind of debated. I was there live. Felt like a very, very close fight live. And he's been out for basically a year.
It was close. I did feel like he won it, but being out for a year and then fighting a guy this sharp, obviously there's no advantage to that.
What's your gut say this fight looks like?
I can't really tell, man. I haven't seen Diaz in a couple of years. I don't know that I've seen him since the Dog Bay fight. So I'm not really sure. I'm personally not entirely sure what he's bringing to the table. You'd have to lean towards LeBron, but it wouldn't blow my mind if Diaz is just a more experienced guy and, you know, is able to at least show LeBron something he hasn't seen.
I just want the truth. What about Danielito Zarilla versus Adam Azim? I like that fight.
That's a good fight. I mean, I would think Azim would win that fight, but again, we've talked about that chin up in the air. Zarilla could be a guy that figures that out.
For sure. He definitely could. Yankiel Rivera's on this undercard, Jaleel Hackett, Mark Castro, and Stephanie Pinero. Any of those fighters stand out to you on this undercard?
Fantastic undercard, man. I mean, I gotta be honest. I've been really enjoying Yankiel Rivera's career. His fight against Andy Velasquez a while back was a real banger. One of the, if not a contender for fight of the year in 2024. So he's been a really fun guy to watch and to follow. As skilled and charismatic as he is, he does seem to have some flaws, and he's been buzzed and he's been hurt. There's a lot to like. I don't know anything about the opponent on that one, but I've been really enjoying
it. Guy. It's another credible opponent. I mean, it seems like they're trying to move him in the direction of getting a world title fight and taking hard fights very early on.
Yeah. Well, he's doing it.
Yeah, and I think another one is interesting to me is Mark Castro, someone that I believe in a lot, but kind of starting to fall down the card. You know, he's not getting those marquee fights that I would expect him to get as of late. What do you think? What do you expect from Mark here?
I mean, I expect a good performance like he always basically does. I think that they're just not in a rush with him either. I think that's what we're seeing. But he's not in a rush. They're not in a rush with him, and it's a good thing that he's staying busy.
Now, with his opponent, I know nothing about him, but it's a tough guy with a couple of losses who's from Argentina. Stop me if you've heard that one before, being a tough opponent.
Yeah, those guys can be sleepers. Those guys can be a little tricky, but I mean, I'm looking at his box rec. He's never been in with a guy like Mark Castro. There's a lot of losing records on here, respectfully to those guys. I would expect Mark to get the job done on this one.
I do too, but I'm just saying, like, when you're going in with a guy that you don't know much about and they're from Argentina, it kind of, gets you a little nervous because we've seen Lucas Matisse pop up out of nowhere and
Jeremiah Ponce in the Matias fight coming out swinging, crazy punches.
Yeah, just guys you've never heard of, and then all of a sudden they didn't get the memo they're supposed to lose. Jaleel Hackett, I also think, is a real guy in this division, and he's someone. This is his second fight with Matchroom, and he's someone to be aware of too.
Sure.
Final stuff. We got Denzel Bentley's back. We got Mohamed Char against Krubeb Pulev are fighting. That just seems crazy because it feels like they've been fighting for my whole adult life.
Also, didn't he used to be Manuel Char?
I think so. Maybe he became Muslim or something, or a name change.
Very strange.
I don't know. Or maybe there was another one. It just, to me, I feel like I've seen him fight for like 20 years.
Well, he's a weird one because it's like, wasn't there some weird thing where it's like for a decade there was a belt where it's like, no, him and Fresa Kendo have to fight for this belt, even though we've been waiting for 7 years. Or I can't remember the exact story, but do you remember what I'm talking about?
No, I interviewed Fresa Kendo about it, and I still didn't really get clarity around the situation. It was just weird. Yeah, it was just really weird. It was a weird. I don't even feel like going into it.
That's a strange old guy fight. That if of all the cards this weekend, that will be the one that I miss, if I miss any.
There's also in the chat, isn't there a cruiserweight WBC interim tight between Ryan Rozicki and an Argentinian opponent? That is next weekend. So Ryan Rozicki, really good cruiserweight, pretty aggressive and reckless, but he's also a guy. He's going to be in a WBC interim title fight this weekend. I'm not sure how you can watch it. Also on Pro Box TV, they're doing a fight in Ireland. Pretty darn good main event. Dylan Moran versus Tyrone McKinney. And your guy, Jonathan Navarro, taking on Jair Valetiera. Pretty solid undercard. Tommy Hyde on the undercard. Brandon McCarthy. Pro Box TV doing what they do. Really good fights,
As always.
Always bangers. So any of that stuff stand out to you?
I mean, for me, Pro Box is what stands out on that. Just that they can consistently deliver a quality product with good matchups.
I mean, they're the best, right? Because it's like they've built a brand now around quality.
I've yet to have like a shitty experience watching a Pro Box card, except there was one time where there was like a New York guy in the ring and Paulie and Chris just couldn't call the fight because they knew the guy. But other than that,
was that the Earl Newman fight?
Bruh, that was fucking brutal.
In the chat, they also want to know, it is rumored that Andy Cruz might fight the dude that stopped Chris Colbert in Pro Box TV, Omar Salcido.
I wouldn't be mad at that.
That's a rumored fight right now. That's a good fight. Also, Diego Pacheco is rumored to fight Steven Nelson.
Love
both
that fight.
Reported by Lance Pugmire, BoxingScene.com, so you know it's credible. What do you think of that matchup?
I think that's one of the best matchups you can make at 168 right now in terms of, the lower half of the top 10, two unbeaten guys who have been tested, but maybe not in a 50-50. That I love that fight.
It's a good fight. It's rumored for January, the end of January. So hopefully we can get an official thing sometime soon to get the word out. That's the show this week. We're going to definitely be doing some marathon shows to close out the year because this weekend's going to have a lot of fight recaps, although some of the action might be a little dull. So we might skim over some of the cards, etc. But the following weekend, we have another crazy stacked weekend of fights. I'm not sure why they do it to us, but they do, just to give you guys a preview.
Because they don't have one thing scheduled in January, bro.
Yeah, well, we got a Pro Box TV card, which already looks stellar. We got a Big Time USA Boxing Solita card that looks solid. Then we have a MVP Prospects card with Antonio Vargas at the top. We got a 360 Promotions card. We've got the MJ Ricardo Espinoza fight from Monaco. We got Alexis Rocha versus Raul Curiel. We got Natasha Jonas returning. So that's all next week. So it's almost like they're like, we need to fit all these fights in.
Silly.
Okay,
Silly
where can people support you?
As always, you can support me at the Slip and Weave podcast on YouTube and Instagram. Check out my episode last week with Amelia Moore. Really fun episode. Follow me at the Lukey Boxing Show, ITR Boxing. You know where to find me, son.
Okay. See you next week, Dakota.
Big pleasure, Bob.